Anyway, compost barns are we call it an alternative loose housing system, and it's an alternative to freestall systems. That's how we're calling it an alternative. Basically, the place where we have freestalls, now we have a better pack resting area. From our experience in Minnesota, and again, that might be different in other parts of the country or other parts like besides the Midwest, we think they're more suitable for dairies up to 250 cows if you have all your cows in a compost pack, or having a special needs barn in larger dairies. We do have a lot of examples in Minnesota, larger dairies with freestalls that have compost barns for their fresh cows, lame cows, etc. But with that said, I know of a project in China that's ongoing right now for 3,000 animals. So I think it's open to other options. You're going to see as we talk about the system, the challenge will be finding enough bedding to have that many cows in this type of system. That will be the challenge. And that's why I'm recommending smaller dairies or smaller barns within a larger dairy, just because you can maybe find enough bedding for that much, but not for a larger operation. Basically, I got this from Kevin Yanni. He's our ag engineer in the university, collaborates with me on projects. And this is a diagram he put together. So let's say you use your imagination here. And this, let's say you're designing a 3-row drive-by freestall barn. This is where the freestalls would be. So instead of having freestalls now, you replace that with a better pack area. So we're going to have this wall around the pack, surrounding the pack. And based on our calculations, of course, you're going to add some waters, walkways for the cows to get on, onto the pack and the equipment to get in. And from our calculations, this size of barn, 200 by 42, would fit approximately 100 cows. So it's going to take more space. Maybe if we had a freestall here, you can put maybe 130 cows. Now you can only put 100. So it does. I hear a rooster. Did you hear a rooster? Aha! There's a rooster. Okay. That's different. I hadn't heard that one before. Anyway, so basically that's the idea behind a compost barn as an alternative again to freestalls. I think we have to quiet down the rooster over here. Wake everybody. There you go. They're still awake, I think. I didn't talk long enough, but maybe. That's good. Yeah, they partied hard last night, those of you. Might be a little tired, so that's good. Okay, wake everybody up. So this is one example. You see here you have the bedded pack. This is, I'm going to talk a little more detail, but there's a wall surrounding the pack. Notice the height of the sidewall. And this barn is 16 feet, so it's taller. There'll be some sort of a ventilation, the 24 diameter fans or some other types. I'm going to see pictures, more pictures later. And in a nutshell, that's what it's like. And here's the feed alley and so forth. So in summary, we're going to have a concrete feed alley, so like you would in a freestall barn. And we have this bedded pack resting area. In Minnesota, they're pretty much all dirt base. They're clay based. They don't have concrete under the pack. And that you're going to consult with your regulations in your own state. It could be different depending on the state. Some states might require concrete. Minnesota is not required. And we know from research done at the university that the liquid is not really percolating down. It's not going all the way to the bottom. So it does work as a manure storage or partial manure storage. And it does not have to have the concrete base, and that saves some money there. But even though you do have storage for manure in the pack, there's about 25 to 30% of that manure from the feed alley that has to be scraped every day, and that has to go somewhere, like a mini pit, some sort of manure storage. We do have a 4 feet concrete wall that surrounds the pack. For those of you who are not from the United States, that's about 1.2 meters. So it's a wall that allows for accumulation of bedding material. And that's pretty much consistent across all the dairies that we've worked with in Minnesota. We do have, again, the walkways. You need to be able to get onto the pack. And I would say a minimum of 2, and more if the barn is longer, because cows need to be able to get in. You don't want to have just one and make it difficult in case there's a dominant cow, or it makes it more difficult for the cows to get back onto the pack. And the majority of barns in Minnesota, not all of them, but the majority are built more like a 3-row drive-by, and they have a roof or not over the feed lane. We do also have some that are built more like a 4-row barn. So it varies, but in general, I would say the majority of them are more like this. What I'm going to do is show examples of barns to give you a better idea what the layout, what it looks like, and probably a handful of examples. And as I show this, we can look at the characteristics of the barns. This one happens to be the very first barn built in Minnesota. This was built by Tom and Mark Portner, and we can blame them for this. You can blame them for me going to doing all this research in compost barns. My grad students, one was here, is Erica, and because they started this thing. They started, and they thought it was a great idea. They wanted to provide their cows with better comfort. And they had an old freestall facility. The cows had a lot of lameness problems, etc. They're not lasting very long. Their cull rates were 38%. And, well, what can we do about it? So they built the first barn in 2001. This is the barn right here. You see they have a lot of brown animals. Not too many black and whites anymore. Over the years, they've replaced them, and they've been breeding with brown Swiss. And this is what the pack looks like inside. I was just there a week and a half ago, and this is summertime, and you see how high the pack is. And this is sawdust in this particular dairy. And he just released to us. I had a group of Japanese visitors a week and a half ago, and we visited this facility. And in 2005, he built a second barn, so he has all his cows on a betta pack. His production went from 20,000 back in 2001 to close to 28,000 pounds per cow per day right now, with a lot of brown cows. So I think that's a pretty good production for brown Swiss herd. So he's very pleased with the system. This is another example. We have maybe a couple of these hoop type of barns in Minnesota that are using a compost system. Again, you see that's the betta pack. And what's different about this barn, they do have a automated feeding system, which is very unusual these days, but that had to do with labor requirements, and the producer wanted to go that route. Another example here, this is built for 200 cows. You have 4 packs. Each one can hold 50 cows. And it's basically a drive-through barn, and you deliver the feed in the middle here, and they have a little bit of a temporary storage of manure between the 2 pans here. And it works well. This is being built about 5 years ago. And this is the inside. So you're going to see that you have the wall that surrounds the pack, and then you have waters. You're making an indentation in that wall, and the water trough is right here. So feed alley, concrete, water trough on this side, betta pack on this side with dirt base. So that's how this one was built. This is another example. This is more of a drive-by with a covered feed alley, 2 separate packs. And this is the inside of the pack, feed alley, perimeter wall, and the betta pack. And sorry for this, I just realized it had been raining outside, and my camera had a few drops of rain in it. But this is the pack. And again, in the summertime, as you see, the pack is higher. And we're going to talk about pack management in a minute, and you understand what I'm talking about being higher or lower. A simpler barn, this particular dairy, cows have access to pasture. So there's some of the organic herds in Minnesota also that are using this system. And they use the betta pack barn, some of them just for winter housing. That happens to be just a pasture-based dairy, not organic, but the cows have access to the betta pack or the compost barn throughout the year. So basically the door stays open. The cows can go to the pasture and come back whenever they want. And you do have another placement for the water trough here in the feed alley rather than by the other side and the wall. So that's another option. I tend to prefer the other option, just so you don't take any feed space here from the cows. But again, there's different ways of doing it. There's no cookie cutter here. Every barn is a little different. It's kind of interesting about compost barns. And this is the inside of the pack. And you see how fluffy that material is. It's a very fluffy material that provides a very nice surface for the cows to lie down. Colleagues of mine in Holland now are calling this the free walking system. Instead of loose housing, because a free stall is also loose. I mean, cows can move around, but there's nothing in the way of the cows. They can walk any direction they want. So it's a free walking system. No, new terminology, I hadn't heard it before, but it's kind of interesting. This is an example of a dairy in Minnesota that has 800 cows and a freestyle facility with mattresses, and then built a compost barn for their special needs. Fresh cows going here, and up to about 50, 60 days in milk. Any cow that does not adapt to freestalls, any cow that goes to the freestalls and she's lame and she can't really, handle that. She goes here. She stays here for her whole life in a compost betta pack. So again, special needs. And he's seeing a big improvement in production. He's very happy with this. He's been using this for 40 years, I think, this particular dairy. And there's some other examples in Minnesota of freestall facilities with more cows using this for special needs. So 100 cows on each side, a drive-by, This is inside of one side of the pack early on when you don't have as much bedding yet. The wall between the feed alley and the pack, and that's another example. So this is a little quick virtual tour of different options on how to build these barns. And these are all barns that have been in operation for quite a while, and they've been happy and satisfied with the system. Not to say that this is easy. It takes management. Like any system, it has to be managed properly. It's not like put my cows here and forget about them, that's going to be easy. It still requires, of course, good management to make it work. Another thing important to talk about is how they manage this pack. What makes it different than a conventional bedded pack system? In a conventional bedded pack system, what people, and we still use those, obviously, dry cows is very common, and it's an option. But in a conventional bedded pack, you're going to use longer straw or corn stalks, and you're going to be adding, hopefully every day or every other day, you're going to add new material on top, and hopefully once a week or every other week, you have to clean the whole thing out. And it's harder to keep it clean. It's more labor intensive. With this type of system, you're using a material that's much more finer. It's finer. It's smaller particle size, and that allows it to be cultivated, aerated twice a day. And the material that was being used by producers in our first University of Minnesota study 2 or 3 years ago that I did with Abby Barber. I don't know if Abby's here, my grad student. The first study we did, all dairies we were working with at the time used sawdust or very fine wood shavings as their bedding material. And it just works very nice for this type of system. More recently, there are producers using some mixtures of materials, using other options, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because the availability of sawdust, it's getting much more difficult to find sawdust and very expensive. In all these dairies, the material is aerated to about 10 inches with the cultivator type equipment. And the purpose of that is to introduce air to the bedding material. And what that does, it generates some microbial activity. And we're going to show you temperatures in a minute. And by generating microbial activity and raising the temperature, you help with evaporation of moisture. And if you have a good ventilation system, you're going to get rid of that moisture and dry the surface, and you're going to have a better surface for the cows to lie on. It's called a compost dairy barn because initially when Tom and Mark Portner start working with this, they noticed that the temperature was higher than the ambient temperature, and they thought, oh, it's composting here. So the name compost barn stuck. We did learn that maybe the temperatures are not quite as high as composting, but something's happening in there that's making it heat up, and the composting activity does get started. So the name stuck, and we call them compost barn. It's not that they're bedded with compost. It's just that composting process has started, and we call it a compost barn. More recently, people are aerating deeper, and I'm going to talk about an example at the end about a producer who is using some type of equipment that goes deeper than 10 inches, and he's had very good success with that. In general, in our initial study, what we found is people are adding a semi-truckload, that's about 18 tons, of sawdust every 2 to 5 weeks, depending on the season. It's much more difficult to manage these things in the wintertime, not in the summer. It's difficult in the wintertime, especially in our conditions in Minnesota with the humidity, with the cold. In winter, we have to actually work harder in the system, add bedding more often to make it work. So they're adding bedding more often in the wintertime than in the summer. Their producers in the summer going sometimes, recently, some of the producers we're working with, going 8-9 weeks without adding any bedding at all in the summertime. Just going through the aeration and drying the surface, and the cows stay clean, cell counts are low. So it's pretty amazing. In our barn in St. Paul, we went 9 weeks last summer without adding any bedding whatsoever. So summer is actually a little bit easier. Winter, we have to add much more often. In general, producers, like I said, we're adding a whole semi-truckload. More recently, I've seen producers adding more often a smaller amount, especially in the winter. They're going to add, 2, 3, 4 inches of material, and they do it maybe that 3 times a week, 2 times a week. So that has changed. This is not we're still learning how to best manage these type of systems. So there's some variation on how people do it. And I see some advantage sometimes of doing that, of adding more often, like I said, especially in the wintertime. In general, producers are not removing any material from the barn during the year. So again, differently than a conventional pack when you have to clean that every week or 2 weeks. We don't clean this one. In the springtime, because the pack is getting higher, producers take maybe a foot or two, depending on how much space they need. They take that out to the field. But when they clean out the whole pack is in the fall. They're going to go down to basically maybe leaving 6 inches to get started with the new pack. Everything else gets out. And most of the producers are using this in their fields as fertilizer. Some producers are trying to make compost out of that. We don't have time today to talk about the composting aspects of it in the talk, but we did some research with Erica Shane. Erica, raise your hand. She's my grad student here working with me on this compost barn systems. And we did some research looking at composting some of the different types of bedding materials. And if any of you have questions about that later on, maybe after the seminar, I'll stay for a while in the room. We can talk about it. So basically, they're using it as fertilizer. And in the fall, they will contract somebody that comes to help them remove all this excavator and, take it out. Takes maybe 4 or 5 hours, so depending on the size of the pack, it could take longer than that. But it's just once a year, and that pack is working as their manure storage, so that's the beauty of it. This is an example of some of the equipment used to aerate the pack twice a day. Basically, this is Portner's system, and you see these are the walkways where you can get in. This will be the feed alley right here. The wall would be right here, and you have this opening one end and the other end of the barn. And you go up, and then you basically just drive over once or twice. It takes maybe 15 minutes or so for a barn this size. And then rototillers. I know at least 3 farms using rototiller. It doesn't go as deep, but seems to be working okay. And this is more of a chisel plow. It goes deeper, and usually the producer that was using this, he was using this once a day, not both times. But it does help to introduce more oxygen into the pack, so that's another option. And you're going to see some other types of cultivators too. These are all homemade kind of things that producers come up with. As you know, their producers are very creative, very resourceful, and they can do these kind of things and come up with ideas on how to best manage their pack. And this is what it's going to look like after you drove over. It's fluffier. The manure is being mixed into the pack. You break out the cow pies, make a nicer surface for the cows when they come back from the parlor. This is usually done when the cows are being milked, so when they come back from the parlor, you have a better surface for them. And hopefully by mixing it and then releasing that moisture, you're going to have a drier surface for the cows. If you're looking at this during the winter time, you're going to see a lot of steam coming up. It just gets very, it's almost, they tell me sometimes it's hard to drive. You don't even see the walls anymore because you got all the steam on your face and you can see anything. Because even though it's not as hot in the winter as you're going to see in a minute, it's still much warmer than the outside temperature. So you're going to have a lot of steam coming up. And that's the moisture that we want to get rid of. And that's one thing I learned in the wintertime, and maybe I'll say that again and again. We need to ventilate these barns in the wintertime, even more than freestalls, a lot more. And you got to open those curtains and get the moisture out and get your fans going, get the moisture out when you're sitting it up. Because if you keep the moisture in, you're going to have a messy pack, and your cell counts can go up. So I think that's important to learn, because it's different in a freestyle system. One question I get all the time is what happens to pack temperatures, So I show you some results. This is this initial study they did with Abby Barberg, where we look at the barns at the time that were using this system for at least a year. And the temperatures average about 108 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of you from other countries, 42.5 degrees Celsius. So it is hotter than ambient temperature. There's some microbial activity going on. And this is the average of different depths. We start at about 6 to 8 inches, and we go 12 to 14 inches, and all the way down to maybe 24 to 36 inches. So different depths, as much as we could get the thermometer down, and it's average over all those, and about 12 different areas across the pack. So we're looking here at a bunch of numbers from all these different barns. And the nice thing, though, is the surface temperature. The surface. It's going to be similar to the barn temperature. And if you have fans blowing on it, recently one dairy that we visited, the temperature of the pack, 8 inches down, 6 inches down was 109 on the average. The surface was 64 because they had a lot of fans blowing right on top of that pack. And again, measure different areas of the barn. So important to have ventilation in the summer to keep the surface cool, because that's what the cows are going to lie down on, and have the microbial activity going on in the deeper surface. So when you mix it again, you release that moisture, and you're going to help dry the surface. Those are very important aspects of the system to make it work. The bedding management is very important. So we do see that temperatures are, this is summer, this was done during the summertime. And pretty much all the packs were above 80, some temperatures, some are not, you see, some are not heating as much. Maybe it has to do some with the management, how often they're stirring or how deep they're going and how often they're adding new bedding. So it is variable, obviously, but we do have an average 108, with some barns being close to 120 on the average. Now, I did a study with Erica at our research and outreach center in Morris, Minnesota. And what we're doing now is a bedding study, looking at alternatives besides sawdust. What can we use in these bedding packs? And these are some of the materials that were available to us that we could procure in our area, and also that Tom Holbach from the Soil, Water, and Climate Department had tested in the laboratory and found that they had good potential as alternative bedding sources, or as he called media. He calls them media. We call them bedding materials. What we found is that we could use corn cobs, ground very small, so we do have to process them, and I would say an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch. Was heating up really nicely, even in wintertime. This is done in the same, by the same management crew, in the same facility, just divided into different packs. So basically all these packs are managed exactly the same. And you see there's a little bit of difference in temperatures. The sawdust is our control. Was doing very nicely. Keep in mind, Minnesota, we get below zero. There were some days here where minus 20. Erica's from Texas, and she really did enjoy being there during the winter time when we're collecting samples, and temperatures are very cold. And it's very windy in Morris, too. So it's really cold outside. And you see this average during the 4 or 5 months that we ran the study. We saw over 80 here for the sawdust. So it was doing pretty well. Some of them a little cooler, but everything, on the average was above freezing. So the average is 77.5. But again, much cooler in winter than summer. And sometimes if you have very cold weather, you're going to have a little bit of a layer on top that's cold. It can freeze a little bit on top. So that's going to be happening. But then once you mix it again, the next milking, you warm it up on the surface. One thing that we think is important is to start your pack before November. By late October at the latest, before the very cold heat, cold wave comes, because then you're not going to get the bugs to get going, and it's going to be cold, and it's not going to work. We tried that in St. Paul, and we had a disaster. We couldn't use it as a bed pack. I mean, a compost barn. We had to use it as a regular bed pack with straw because it didn't heat up. You don't want to start too late in the cold climates. If you're from Idaho, it's a bit different. But if you're from Minnesota, we have to kind of watch for that. We also looked at wood chip fines. This is the byproduct of the pulp industry. The fines that they can't use for paper production or for anything. We got that, and it was wet, about 50% moisture, so we had to mix with sawdust to make it drier. We think you need to start with something that's drier than 20% moisture in our climate, in the Midwest. Again, more arid climates is different, but in Minnesota, yes, 20% or less. So we had to mix sawdust with the chips to get to 20% moisture, and it was approximately a 2-to-1 volume to volume ratio. We didn't necessarily go by weight, but by volume. So you would have maybe 3 inches of sawdust, 6 inches of wood chips. And then we also had the mixtures of soybean straw, ground fine. Soybean straw, ground fine can work pretty well, mixed with sawdust or mixed with chips. And then the soybean straw by itself. It's a little harder to work with. It packs a little bit. It kind of bridges together a little bit more. But it can work. And I think if we had a different type of mixing equipment, like a rototiller or a little deeper equipment, we could have made it work better. So those are the key things. Temperatures in our 6 farms that we're doing now, these are preliminary data, looking at temperatures in winter and summer. We're doing a study now, going to farms and observing their management. These are farms using mixtures of bedding, not just sawdust, maybe a little bit of soybean straw, maybe a little bit of corn stalks mixed in, flax chives, wheat straw byproduct, so different options of bedding. We did see the temperature in the summer is averaging about 101 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the winter 71 or so. So similar to what we saw before, maybe a little bit cooler. Another big question I get all the time is milk quality and other health. Yes, big concern. It's a bed pack, cows are bedded on manure. What's happening with milk quality? So first study, we saw an average of 325,000 cells per mil from the HIA during the summer. At the time, Minnesota average was 333,000. So again, similar to the average of the state, maybe a little better. With a couple of barns that brought that up, the average up. 650,000, 550,000. Quite a few below 250. So again, coming back to management, like any system, you can have all kinds of data in terms of cell counts. This is from Morris. We did an average of 146,500, so lower. We did have a spike in this particular bedding material. Talked to the manager recently to just remind me what happened. We did have a cow that got injured and they got a mastitis problem, and she had like 9 million, very high cell counts, so that really messed us up a little when you have only 16 cows per treatment. But in general, I would say most materials were below 200, so I would say pretty much all of them can work in terms of somatic cell counts. And this is about just 4 months of data, with the exception this material was actually shorter. We only had a couple months on that one. In the recent study, we do have a couple, again, of farms that are very high, both winter and summer. Our average is higher than the previous study, with 370,000 cells. And we do have a few days that are doing well, below 250 here. With one here that had a spike during the summer. I don't know exactly what happened here. I haven't had a chance to really look into this data very detailed yet. It's just preliminary at this point. But again, we're going to have days that can do well in the system and some that struggle a little bit in terms of cell counts. Mastitis infection rates, we did have some historic data from our study that we did with the 12 farms. And 67% of the dairies actually had a reduction in mastitis infection rates instead of an increase, which was surprising to us. This is a significant improvement from previous system, which most of them were tie-stall systems, to the new system. So that was a positive, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen all the time. Other things are taking place here. They're using now a different parlor maybe. Other things are going on that helped maybe to reduce the problems with mastitis. I'm not saying they don't have mastitis. They do have, like everybody, but just recently, again, visiting these days with some foreign visitors. One day it was 1 case a month. One was 2 cases a year. One was 1 case every 3 months. The other one was 1 case every 2 months. So it's not like they have a huge issue with mastitis. As long as they're managing things right, as long as they have good teat ends and good cow prep and those kind of things. Milk production, just an example from historical data that we had from the 12-farm study. About 90% of the dairies in that study saw an improvement in dairy production. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they not only moved to a better pack or compost barn, but they also now maybe have a TMR mixer, or they're feeding the cows differently. So it's not only due to the cow comfort improvement with the better pack, but it has to do to some other factors that improved the production of these cows. But again, they're pleased. These producers were pleased. They saw an improvement in production, averaging about 2,000 pounds per year per cow. Feed and leg health. That's one that I think I'm most confident talking about seeing an improvement. And is expected. You have a much better surface. It has better traction. It has better cushion. The cows are off concrete a big portion of the day. They're still going to spend 5 hours a day eating, and that's concrete. They're still going to go to a holding pen, and that's concrete. But the rest of the time, they can be in a soft surface. And that's easier on their feet and easier on their legs. So we did see some improvement on that. I don't have the recent study summarized yet. We're going to see if that's still true. We did have one dairy in our recent study that had a severe case of hairy warts during the winter, and that can make your cows lame, obviously. It's very painful. And they got treated, and the second assessments were doing different seasons. Spring and summer was already better. But again, that can happen in any system if you buy cows and you bring that into your dairy. But overall, I think leg health was an improvement compared to some of the other systems that we've been doing research with. Our average for that study was approximately 8% of cows being lame. Freestyle study that we did was more like 25% being lame. Even sand barns, the average was 18%. The average in mattress barns was more like close to 30% of cows being lame. So maybe that is one area that producers are happy with. And they also mentioned to us they don't trim because of lameness as much. They do maintenance trimming, but they don't have to have the trimmer come for a lot of lame cows like they had before. So that's an improvement. Also, another improvement you're going to see in our welfare assessment, hawk lesions. We did not see many cows with hawk lesions. Actually, 75% of them had no lesions. And again, that's almost the opposite you're going to see on some of the freestyle systems, especially if you have matrices. A lot of times you're going to see, because depending if you don't put enough bedding, you're going to have abrasion. If you put enough bedding, you're fine. But a lot of times people maybe don't put enough bedding on top of mattresses, and then you run into situations of having maybe 60% of your cows having some sort of lesion. 24% of them only had a hair loss, which is we call mild lesion. And we still had about 1% with swollen hocks. And that might be something that they're still recovering from the previous system, or maybe it's an injury situation, etc. One thing that might happen in these barns, some cows get stepped on teats sometimes because they're lying down, and then you have an aggressive cow in heat, and they just jump over because it's so easy now. Like I said, it's free walking, so they can just jump over that cow. So you need to watch for some of those aggressive cows in heat. And maybe one cow every 6 months or something. The producers tell me they're going to have one cow every 6 months or something with that problem. So it's not very prevalent, but something to look at. That's animal welfare. We've learned some things over the years. Doesn't mean that's the end of the story. We're still learning, like I said, we're still learning how to manage these types of barns. But from the producers, and this all these, it's field studies, it's producer observations primarily. We're learning with them. We're learning along with the producers. And this was a producer idea, so again, they have to be acknowledged for that. What we think is working is providing enough space per animal in the pack, so they don't get crowded, and you don't get a lot of problems with cell counts. And there's a paradigm shift to think that, but if you have more space per cow, we're going to use less bedding, not more bedding. Because if you have them all crowded up, your bedding is going to get dirty in a hurry. And you have to add, if you want to make it work, you're going to have to add bedding more often and more of it. So actually having more space per animal helps with the welfare and also helps with use of bedding. We're looking at 80 to 85 square feet per cow for hostings. Some of our dairies in Minnesota have up to 100 square feet per animal, and they want to keep it that way. They see some advantage to that. Smaller breeds, jerseys, 65 square feet, we think is sufficient. Fine, dry wood shavings or sawdust for bedding are still the best option, but if we can't find it, we think mixtures with sawdust or other materials, like I mentioned earlier, soybean straw, ground fine, corn cobs if you can find them, ground fine, flax chives. I've had a lot of observations from, especially Canada, people using flax chives is available from the flax industry. I know a producer in South Dakota, and he probably is going to be next door in a little bit here, half hour or so, talking about his dairy, and I think he has a compost barn. I believe that's the producer who's using ground straw, wheat straw mixed with a little bit of corn stalks. It can make it work. We have a producer using a wheat straw byproduct, which is basically a byproduct of making particle board with the wheat straw, and then there's a dust that comes off of it, and he's using that successfully for the last year and a half or 2 years. We have, like I said, different types of wood products besides sawdust, like the wood chip fines that I mentioned to you guys that might be available in some areas, and that they can use for the wood industry, for the pulp industry. Again, that one, if it's coming wet, has to be mixed with something dry, either processed straw or sawdust. So there's some other options, but that is the challenge of this system, finding bedding. And it's going up in cost, so that's holding up the system a little bit. There was a lot of interest on it, and there's still interest on it. But then when you're faced with how much bedding I need to find in the Midwest, it's a bit of a challenge. In Israel, I have a colleague over there, ag engineer, who has been sending me pictures of a dry manure bedding. Like they're managing as a compost barn. All they put in is dry manure. And eventually accumulate enough manure, and you mix it, and it's drying on the surface, and it's working beautifully, but it's much more arid in Israel than it is in Minnesota, so a little harder for us. Another question I get, can I use manure solids, separated manure solids? We haven't done a lot of research on that. I know South Dakota operation that was planning to do that for their special needs, mix manure solids from a digester with some byproduct, straw or something ground up. Don't know how is that working. Maybe that could be an option if you have a % of something dry to go with it. By itself, it probably doesn't offer the structure. You need the structure for this. You're driving over twice a day. You need to keep it fluffy. You don't want it to pack down. So the moisture and the manure solids coming out at 65% is a little too wet. It doesn't have enough structure. It's much finer particle. But mixed with something, it might work. So those are things we still need to kind of find out. So we need to refer to evaluating those things. Need to aerate the pack twice a day. Well, if you're milking 3 times a day should be fine too. This comes from the producers. They add bedding when it begins to stick to the cows. So the cows go into the parlor, you notice a little more bedding on the udder. Oh, better add sawdust. Or I need to add new bedding. One thing that's important here, you need to have your bedding in hand. So you don't wait a week before you put the new bedding. You saw this and then we waited a week, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to get it dirtier, you're going to have higher cell counts. So you need to be ready to add new bedding as soon as you notice, okay, it's getting a little wetter and I need to add new bedding. We think that moisture is about 60% or so. 60, 65 at the most. It's going to be too wet if you go above that. So we need to make sure you stay below that 50, 55 range. And with the manure into the pack. Again, starting with something dry, ideally below 20, and then stay at that below 60 or 55 for the overall pack moisture on top. And we need to ventilate these barns. We need to have fans, not only to cool cows here, but also to get rid of the moisture, to get that air out. This is very important, these systems. Please don't do this type of system without ventilation. I know it's an issue. And even in winter, we have to ventilate. It's very important. Cow preparation. We're putting these cows in a better pack. There's a lot of exposure to microorganisms. I don't have time to show you the numbers, but we have millions. We have millions of pathogenic mastitis pathogens in these better packs. If you take a sample, you're going to find millions of them. They're there. But if the cows are well managed, we have good immune systems, they're comfortable, you do very good cow preparation, we have very good teat ends that are healthy, doesn't mean you're going to have a lot of problems. But you need to have very good cow prep, make sure teats are clean, teat ends are clean, so that's very important. Another thing that I've noticed recently, I think is very important, is use a J5 vaccine. Because you do have the exposure to pathogens. You could have coliform mastitis, and they're very serious. They can kill a cow just like that. If you vaccinate them, you're not going to lose them probably. You're going to be less severe, and you're going to have less problems of losing cows. And that's an interesting example. Recently visiting a dairy, this particular dairy vaccinates everybody now because it's in a better pack. And the heifer grower knows he has to vaccinate the heifers, so they come in all vaccinated. But they had a pet cow, like a Jersey cow on the farm for the kids or whatever, and they forgot to vaccinate her. Oh, well, she's not part of that same system going to the grower. Guess what? She died 2 months ago with coliform mastitis. And this is a pack that's well managed. It doesn't have a lot of bugs on it. We took samples. It's not that high. Maybe 2,000 or 6,000 coliforms per meal, which is not a lot. He had a lot more bacillus, like millions of it, and she still picked up. So you need to be careful with that. J5 vaccine is another thing I'm recommending. And now to finish off, I want to show you an example of a producer who was able to keep the pack temperatures over 100 degrees average, even in the winter time in Minnesota when it's below zero. What he did, this is Doug Kerfeld from Albany, Minnesota. He added 2 to 3 inches of dry bedding 3 times a week, during the winter only. During the summer, he only added bedding between May and last week, or a week and a half ago. He only added bedding once, between May and September, once. And he had a whole semi-truck load, but just once. In the winter, that's what I'm saying, the winter is the most work. He's adding 2 to 3 inches 3 times a week. And in the evening, he was using a cultivator, so it doesn't go as deep. The day after he added bedding, he wouldn't actually even cultivate, just leave it alone. And then in the morning, he was using a chisel plow, goes deeper. So that introduces more air into the pack. It gets the microbial activity going. It generates the heat, and then you get rid of the moisture. He kept the curtains open, unless it was really, really windy and cold. Even in the winter, we were there on a day that was probably 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think it's cold. For me, at least it is. Maybe not for the cows, but for me, it's kind of cold. And the curtains are open. This is a 3-row kind of barn, so you have a drive-by feeding. So that side is always open, is the feed alley side. So the cow side was also open. And I go there, this is open, and it's cold. But not cold for the cows, and not cold for when you're in the pack. So he would leave it open unless it maybe gets cold at night. Obviously, the curtains are going to be closed. And I noticed when we're there that he's now aerating the pack. He actually turned the fans on. Again, this is 10 degrees. Turn the fans on, open the curtains are open, and all the steam is getting out of the barn. It's getting out of the barn. And then he turns the fans off. Maybe close the curtains if you're going to be really cold. So he's trying to get rid of that moisture, and I think that's very important. He kept that pack dry, kept it warm. So it's kind of thinking out of the, This is a paradigm shift here, thinking out of the box. If he knew that it's going to be very cold, we have a very cold Arctic blast coming in, he would add a fresh layer of bedding. Even if he put bedding the day before, he would add a new layer. And did not aerate the pack to keep the heat in. So it works as an insulator, and you don't lose that heat. So it's kind of interesting. I learned from him. Like I said, I learned with the producers a lot. So this is an example. I don't know if he's going to do the same thing this winter, but worked for him last winter. Okay, now the question, come back to our initial question of the seminar. Are compost barns a viable housing option? I think the goal of these barns was improved cow comfort and longevity. The dairies that moved from a tie-style system to this achieved that goal. Reduced prevalence of lameness and hawk lesions, yes, I see that. The cow hygiene, the body condition scores, udder health, milk quality, herd performance. I didn't have a lot of time to show you, but milk production, reproduction. I think they're similar, or they can be similar to other systems, but we need to manage properly. Manage the pack, manage the cows, milking procedures, etc. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and it's going to be a disaster. So again, it takes management. Like anything, we can have a freestyle, you need management. Pasture-based, you need management. We need to make sure we're doing things right. So if managed properly, it could be an option, I think, but you guys can decide based on what we talked about, and maybe after our discussion here, the question and answer discussion. But again, this is the big challenge. Bedding. Bedding is the big challenge. It's getting costly and difficult to find. So if you can guarantee a source of bedding, if you have that in your region, and then you can go for it. And again, if you have a very large dairy, I think that's kind of difficult to accomplish too, to find enough bedding. But if you use a special needs barn, or if you have 200 cows or so, and you can guarantee that you can find it, it can work well. Producers now are actually buying sawdust during the summer and stockpiling it, building a shed of some sort, and putting 10 to 12 semi-truckloads of sawdust in for the winter. So because winter is the most difficult time to find sawdust. And it's when we need more of it. Because like I said, we have to add bedding more often. So they've learned the lesson. They buy in the summer. It's cheaper in the summer. There's more of it, at least in our situation in Minnesota. And they store it, and then they use it in the winter. And that, it's an option. So again, bedding. Bedding is the key here. And it's going to be what holds the system back a little bit. So this is what I want to have the time maybe to talk to you about. We can open up for questions.